There are places in Ethiopia that feel less like destinations and more like the beginning of the earth. In the Danakil, the ground smokes and the air tastes of sulfur. In Harar, men step into the night and hand-feed wild hyenas as if the boundary between human and animal was never fully agreed upon. High above the escarpments of the Simien Mountains, a gelada sits in the evening light, making calls so complex that scientists have compared them to speech. This is not the Ethiopia most of the world imagines first. News headlines know one version of the country. But Ethiopia is much older than the headlines. The land holds some of the earliest human remains ever discovered. It gave rise to one of the world's oldest Christian civilizations. It preserves churches carved not from quarried stone, but directly into the living rock beneath people's feet. Here, the crust of a continent is still being pulled apart in real time. Rituals older than written language are still practiced not as performances, but as life. Ethiopia is not a place where history happened and ended. Here, history is still active. It burns, moves, erodes, chants, migrates, and survives. And somehow, for all that, it remains absent from most people's idea of essential travel. That is the mystery. This film is the answer. The road drops fast. One moment there are highland slopes and patches of green, then scrub, then bare earth, then almost no sign that life was ever meant to be comfortable here. As the vehicle descends below sea level, the world seems to empty itself of softness. By the time the plateau is gone behind you, the temperature has climbed past 45 degrees Celsius. There is no tree cover, no shelter, no illusion that this place was made for ease. This is the Danakil Depression, around 116 meters below sea level, often described as the hottest inhabited place on Earth. And yet people have lived here for thousands of years. The Afar have crossed, worked, traded, and endured in this environment for longer than most states have existed. Their presence here is not just evidence of toughness. It is evidence that some human cultures are inseparable from the extremes that shaped them. Beneath this landscape, the planet is literally pulling itself apart. The Arabian, Nubian, and Somali tectonic plates meet here and drift away from one another a little more each year. The earth under the Danakil is not stable desert floor. It is a fracture zone in progress. Given enough geological time, seawater will eventually flood this basin. What stands here now is temporary. The split has already begun, and when night comes, the horizon starts to glow. At the center of this furnace stands Erta Ale, a shield volcano famous for the lava lake at its summit, one of the longest lived on Earth. For the Afar, it was the mountain that smoked like the underworld. For volcanologists, it is one of the clearest open windows into the planet's interior. Both descriptions arrive at the same truth from different directions. The lava never fully rests. It folds, breaks, hardens, collapses, and opens again. Heat rises in waves. Rock shifts under pressure. The surface glows like the memory of a younger Earth, before oceans, before trees, before anything human existed to name what it was seeing. Stand on the rim, and the experience is almost impossible to reduce to scenery. It feels like witnessing formation itself, not as theory, not as reconstruction, but as something still happening in front of you. Erta Ale means smoking mountain. It sounds too simple for what it is, and that simplicity somehow makes it more accurate. Then comes the part that looks unreal, even when you are standing inside it. Yellow so bright it feels synthetic. Green that seems closer to poison than nature. White sulfur crusts, orange rims, mineral pools flashing colors that belong more to chemistry diagrams than landscapes. Dalol looks like the earth has spilled its internal fluids onto the surface and left them exposed to the sun. This is one of the strangest hydrothermal fields anywhere on the planet. Here, heated water rises through the salt flats of the depression carrying acids, minerals, and gases. When those fluids hit the air, they crystallize, stain, and harden into terraces, domes, and bubbling basins of astonishing color. But the beauty of Dalol is inseparable from its hostility. Some of its pools are so acidic that they measure around pH 0.1, harsher than battery acid. In recent years, scientists studying the site confirmed what the landscape had long implied. Some of these pools support no life at all. No bacteria, no archaea, no microbial trace. On the surface of Earth, this may be one of the closest things to a sterile environment. That matters because it interrupts a comforting assumption. We often behave as if life naturally occupies every corner of the world. Dalol answers back. No, not every place is meant to sustain us. Not every place is even meant to sustain itself. From the air, the geometry is mesmerizing. A slow pass over the pools, the mineral edges trembling in heat, crystal formations catching the light. Then the eye shifts outward, and movement appears at the horizon. A line. Then another. Then the forms resolve into camels. Dozens. Then hundreds. This is one of the oldest trade routes in the region. Afar, workers still cut salt from the flats by hand, shaping blocks that are loaded 4 at a time onto camelbacks. The caravans then move north over several days toward Mekelle, continuing a system of exchange that reaches far back into the era of the Axumite Empire. The tools have barely changed. The route remains the same. The trade survives because the landscape has never offered an easy alternative. To outsiders, this place reads as apocalypse. To the afar, it is terrain. They do not move through it like conquerors or victims. They move through it like people at home. That is what makes the Danakil difficult to understand from a distance. It is not just extreme, it is inhabited knowledge. From the furnace of the lowlands, the road climbs again into the Ethiopian highlands. The color changes first, burnt earth giving way to cooler greens, and then the altitude. Eventually, the road arrives at what seems, at first glance, like a cut in the ground. But step closer to the edge, and the shape below begins to make sense. It is a church. Not built on the plateau, but revealed from within it. Lalibela's churches do not rise from foundations. They were carved downward into the rock itself. The most famous, the Church of St. George, stands inside a trench cut from a single block of volcanic tuff. From above, its cross-shaped roof sits flush with the surrounding ground, so that the first view is not of walls or towers, but of a ceiling where no ceiling should be. You do not approach it the way you approach a building. You descend toward it as if entering a thought carved into stone. The churches of Lalibela were commissioned in the medieval period under King Lalibela, who is said to have envisioned a new sacred landscape in Ethiopia after pilgrimage routes to Jerusalem became difficult. 11 churches were cut from the plateau, linked by tunnels, passages, and trenches. Historians debate certain details. What they do not debate is the result. 8 centuries later, these are not ruins. They are living places of worship. That continuity changes everything. The surfaces are not just old, they are used. The steps are worn by feet. The doorways are polished by hands and shoulders brushing through them year after year, century after century. During Jena, Ethiopian Christmas on January 7th, tens of thousands of pilgrims fill Lalibela. White-robed worshippers move through the sunken courtyards and narrow stone passages carrying prayers into spaces that have never stopped receiving them. That is what gives Lalibela its force. It is not archaeology. It is devotion given form, and then kept alive so long that the stone itself has become soft with contact. Far to the north, another Ethiopia appears. In Axum, a granite monument rises into open sky, a stele cut from a single mass of stone, towering over the landscape as proof that this was once the center of a civilization connected to the ancient world. The Axumite kingdom traded with Rome, Persia, India, and Arabia. It minted coins. It built in stone. It shaped an identity powerful enough to outlast empires. It was also one of the earliest states on earth to adopt Christianity officially. In the 4th century, long before Christianity would dominate much of Europe, it was already rooted here in the Horn of Africa. That fact alone overturns entire mental maps. Ethiopia was not a late receiver of religious history. It was one of its early makers. And in Axum, tradition goes even further. Ethiopian Orthodox belief holds that the Ark of the Covenant rests here, guarded inside a chapel by a monk whose entire life is devoted to watching over it. Whether one approaches that claim through faith or skepticism, the deeper truth is the same. This is a place where sacred history is not treated as metaphor. It is housed, guarded, and lived with. South again, the landscape changes into something even more unexpected. Gondar rises from the highlands with towers, walls, royal compounds, and the unmistakable silhouette of castles. Real castles. In Ethiopia, Emperor Fasilides began the complex in the 17th century, and later rulers expanded it into a walled royal city of halls, baths, chapels, and ceremonial structures. The architecture resists easy classification. It is not quite European, not quite Middle Eastern, not quite anything external viewers expect. Yet the mind keeps returning to the same word: castle. Gondar forces a correction in how people imagine Africa's built history. And then comes the escarpment. The road bends, vegetation thins, and suddenly the earth seems to end. The Simien Mountains fall away in sheer cliffs and basalt walls, plunging toward valleys layered in haze. These highlands were born from volcanic eruption and then sculpted by millions of years of erosion into one of the most dramatic mountain landscapes on the continent. Peaks rise above 4,000 meters. Ras Dashen reaches 4,550. Everything here feels oversized. The drops, the sky, the silence. At the cliff edge sits one of the most distinctive primates on Earth, the Gelada. A male pauses on a ledge with empty air behind him, his chest marked by a red patch of skin so vivid it looks painted. When he yawns, enormous canines flash out and vanish again. Then he lowers his head and returns to grazing. Geladas are the only primates that live primarily on grass. They exist almost entirely in these Ethiopian highlands, moving across open plateau by day and sleeping on cliff faces by night where predators struggle to follow. Their societies are vast and noisy, built around constant vocal exchange. Scientists studying their calls have noted a complexity unusually close to features of human-style social communication. In other words, this is not just an animal making noise. It is an animal participating in an intricate social world. And nearby, moving through the same endangered ecosystem, is another rarity: the Ethiopian wolf. Red-coated, narrow-faced, quiet, and astonishingly scarce, it is the rarest canid on the planet. Fewer than 500 remain. It has survived glacial cycles, volcanic upheaval, and the long timeline of human emergence in East Africa. Now its greatest threat is loss of habitat. Even here, in one of the oldest and wildest landscapes on Earth, survival has become modern. From the escarpments, the camera turns east, and the land seems to fall open. Below lies a valley so wide and so deep that it looks less like a feature and more like a process made visible. This is the Great Rift, one section of a vast geological system running thousands of kilometers down East Africa. And in Ethiopia, it becomes impossible to mistake what it is. The continent is breaking apart. This is not ancient violence frozen in stone. It is active tectonics. The crust is thinning. Faults continue to shift. The valley widens over time, and the land keeps adjusting around that movement. To stand above it is to look at geology not as memory, but as action. Somewhere in this broken terrain, Early humans once moved through a world being physically remade beneath them. The Rift Valley also holds abundance where the surrounding land suggests scarcity. Lakes appear below in sheets of brightness, and some of them are crowded with life at absurd scale. Flamingos gather in numbers so large they alter the color of the water from above. Entire shorelines seem to blush pink. Their calls arrive as one merged sound, less like birds than like a low weather front spreading over the lake. They feed on algae that thrive in alkaline water, and the pigments in that food become the bird's color. Once again, Ethiopia offers one of its favorite contradictions: beauty produced by harsh chemistry. The Awash River cuts through this landscape and then vanishes into the east, never reaching the sea. It ends in the same broad region that gave the world Lucy, one of the earliest known hominin ancestors ever discovered. That overlap matters. In Ethiopia, origins are layered on top of one another. Human origin, religious origin, geological origin. Again and again, the same country keeps appearing near the start of things. Eventually, the road leads to Harar. The old city appears behind a wall of whitewashed stone, its gates marking the boundary between one kind of world and another. Inside are dozens of mosques, hundreds of alleyways, a distinct urban culture, and a history of scholarship that made Harar one of the great Islamic centers of Africa. The streets are narrow, winding, and intimate. Colors gather on walls in pale blues, earth reds, and ochres. The city feels enclosed not only by stone, but by continuity. Harar also carries the residue of people who were changed by entering it. Arthur Rimbaud came here after abandoning poetry and spent his later years as a trader, never returning to literature. That detail feels appropriate. Harar is the kind of place that redirects a life. And then night falls, and one of the city's most unusual rituals begins. Just beyond the old walls, men sit with baskets of raw meat and call into the darkness. Eyes appear first, then bodies. Wild hyenas emerge and approach close enough to feed by hand. The practice began generations ago, perhaps as a way to manage relations between the city and its scavengers. And it survives now as one of the strangest long-running truces between humans and large predators anywhere in the world. Nothing about the scene feels performative when you are close to it. The animals are still wild. The people are still calm. The space between them is built on repetition, recognition, and trust that never becomes total. In Harar, even the line between fear and familiarity has learned how to coexist. Feels unusually thin. As the drone rises, the Omo begins to flatten into shape and texture. River, grass, settlement, path, shadow. The higher the camera climbs, the more Ethiopia starts to resemble an opening image rather than an ending. Highlands, rift, volcanic land. Ancient settlement, ceremony, animal life on cliffs and plains. Everything joining back together into one continuous story. And that may be the point. Ethiopia is not simply rich in attractions, it is rich in origin. The earliest human fragments, lava at the surface, faith carved into mountains, empires older than European imagination usually allows, wolves and galadas still holding on in the highlands, rituals still active in the south. So much of what the world calls ancient is not finished here. It is still happening. Ethiopia does not feel like a forgotten destination. It feels like a place the rest of the world is still catching up to. Not the end of a story, the beginning of one that never actually stopped.